Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories. We have stories that should thrill you a little and chill you a little.
It's amazing.
What you'll hear are adventures sent in by you guys, classic stories from the pulp mags, and episodes from the golden age of radio. We have special segments like Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
That's amazing.
And Paranormal Expeditions.
I think we're going to have a lot of fun.
So settle in for the next hour and enjoy the show. One more thing. You just might want to prepare yourself to be taken away from today.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by Facebook chats. We all love them, or at least pretend to. Oh, and they can provide some really fine stories. And isn't that why we're all here today?
Speak for yourself.
I just did.
Dr. Greenwood speaking.
Oh, Dr. Greenwood. Dr. Greenwood, this is Mrs. Barnes.
Yes?
Something horrible has happened. My husband...
What's happened to him? He seemed well this morning.
The medicine you left. He's killed himself with it.
Oh, Dr. Greenwood.
Where's your mistress?
Well, Mrs. Barnes is upstairs in her bedroom. She's taken this very badly, Doctor.
Isn't there anyone with her?
No. Mrs. Barnes only phoned you and Mr. Graham.
Graham.
Speedy Graham. He's the manager of the Blue Sox, the baseball team. Mr. Barnes pitched for them.
Oh, where's his body?
Well, right in this next room, sir. Won't you step this way?
Has anyone been in here since Mr. Barnes died?
Well, no, sir. That is...
Sorry, Dr. Greenwood, that I couldn't be here to greet you.
I understand completely, Miss Barnes.
I'm still hardly able to think clearly.
Please, try to tell me what happened.
Well, after you left this morning, Mr. Barnes became very difficult.
You mean about the injections I told you to give him?
Yes. He thought that I wouldn't know how to handle the hypodermic. He begged me to send for you.
And then? Then what happened?
Well, I came in about 2 this afternoon. Right into this room, I saw him putting the hypodermic needle into his own arm. His face was contorted with pain.
Yes?
I cried out to him. He slumped to the ground, pale as a ghost. And a few minutes later, he was dead. Look, you can still see the mark of the needle there on his left arm.
Yes, so you can. So you can.
Oh, answer that, please, Gertrude. It's probably Speedy. He said he'd be over as soon as he could make it.
You say, Mrs. Barnes, that your husband became very pale?
Yes. And, oh, please, Dr. Greenwood, don't make me describe it to you again. It was too horrible.
Mrs. Barnes, I don't know what to say. It's been a great shock.
Oh, thank you, Speedy. I know how you feel.
Mr. Graham, do you know of any reason why Mr. Barnes would have wanted to take his own life?
Why, no, sir, I can't think of any. Always seemed happy to me. Excepting for this last spell, always had good health, made good money. Why, he was the best southpaw in the business.
I see.
Mrs. Barnes, you've had a hard few hours. Why don't you rest while I take care of the details?
Mr. Graham, I don't think I'd wasted any sympathy with Mrs. Barnes. I'm going to have her arrested on the charge of murdering her husband.
Why does Dr. Greenwood accuse Mrs. Barnes of murdering her husband? In a moment, the doctor will tell you himself, but first...
You know what, Ron? These mysteries for the most part don't offer much in the way of clues.
Oh, really?
Yes, but this one is the exception to the rule. We have all the information we need.
I really hate it when you say that.
Let me guess you don't have a clue.
You would be right.
Riddle me this. Why was the shot in his left arm?
I don't know, because it wasn't in his right?
Ron, you have the mind of a steel trap. Nothing can get out.
And now, let's see if your observation is as keen as Dr. Greenwood.
Well, to tell you the truth, I was puzzled in the beginning. I couldn't understand how he could have killed himself with a harmless preparation that I'd prescribed.
But how did you connect Mrs. Barnes to the murder?
Her story and the telltale needle mark on his left arm. You see, Barnes was a southpaw, a left-handed pitcher. If he had really given himself the needle, the mark would have been on the right arm.
Oh, he was a southpaw. I should have guessed that one.
Yes, but like all the other previous times, you struck out.
Oh, hey, a baseball metaphor. Good one.
Thank you. I like to think I bring an air of discernment to the show.
Well, you bring the smell of something.
What's that you said?
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Today is one of those shows where you're going to hear a lot of stuff. We have no less than 12 different tales that range from ghost stories to science fiction to a memorial tale and even a brand new Johnny, Is It True? We will even visit the 1904 Olympiad. So sit back, enjoy, because I think you're in for something completely different. So as I mentioned in the 500th episode of the show, I'm wanting to get back to bringing guests on the program, and I could use your help in doing it. Who would you like to see me interview? I'm planning on reaching out to authors, which is something I did quite often a few years ago. Who better to tell a story than an author? Do you have a favorite? Also, I've had a few musicians on, and these have been some of my absolute favorite episodes. They also can tell a great story with their music. So please tell me what you think and what you'd like to hear. It can only be good for the podcast. Now, speaking of good, here is a review of my latest and greatest listen on Audible. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. They have over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, computer, Kindle. Whatever you have, you can listen to Audible on it. So what am I listening to? Grand Theft Astro by Scott Mayer and narrated by Elizabeth Evans. From the author of Magic 2.0 comes an outer space caper where it's the thief who's having something stolen from her. Her life. It is the distant future, and Baird is a loner, a part-time spy, and a notorious, alleged thief. Notorious for the boldness of her crimes. Alleged because nobody's ever been able to legally prove she committed any of them. Here is a clip from early in the book.
Higson jumped and let out a yelp. "Why did you do that?" "Because he was a liar and a cheat, and I couldn't trust him," Y43 said. "You're not a very fast learner, are you?" Higson looked at Cornwell's corpse, then up at the turrets, before finally saying, "Thank you. Thank you for not killing me." Y43 said, "Much like your device isn't working yet, I haven't killed you yet. Unlike your device, I might still do my job. You've put a lot of effort into this thing." "All of my effort, night and day. It's my obsession."
And Cornwell's people have supported your work.
They recruited me out of university. The contents of this case are the result of terasolars of investment and a decade of my sweat. Y43 sauntered toward the case.
And it doesn't work. I think that proves my point. Still.
As she opened the lid, something very small and very fast flew out from the case and hit Y43 in the neck. She staggered backward to regain her balance, but her legs failed to move in a predictable manner. She tried to speak, but could only manage to bellow out inarticulate vowel sounds. She flopped to the floor, her arms swinging out of control, and writhed there, drool oozing out of her open mouth. A woman climbed out of the case, unfolding herself with great care. She stood up and stretched her back. She looked to be somewhere in her late 30s to early 40s. Her small frame was partially concealed under a bulky black sweater and slim black cigarette pants. She wore a long, outdated pair of gargles, virtual display glasses with heavy black frames. She reached down and pulled the golden eyebrow from Y43's face, taking more than a few eyebrow hairs with it, and tossed it aside. "Sorry about the neural scrambler," she said. "I thought I might need a distraction. Didn't know you were going to kill the other guy." Y43 let out a wet, unintelligible squawk. She tried to grab the woman in black and failed miserably. Only one of her hands got close. A single metallic green fingernail scratched a small patch of exposed skin at the woman's ankle. The woman bent her leg to look at the scratch, scowling. "Really?" Y43 made an undignified guttural noise that managed to sound a bit triumphant. "That's just petty." The woman pointed her index finger at Y43 with a stiff arm, as if aiming a weapon, but none was easily visible. There was a whisper of a sound, like a single hit to the world's smallest cymbal, and Y43 fell limp and silent. The woman in black reached down and took the memory drive holding the untraceable 2 gigasolar payment. As she stood back up, she glanced down at Cornwell's corpse. "Serves him right for calling me heavy, the feeking Doug. You okay, Higson, is it?" "Yes, Dr. Higson. I'm fine, I think. Who are you? Where's my device?" She walked up to one of the turrets, found the manual controls, and started fiddling with them as she spoke. "First question. Who am I? I'm the person who stole your device this morning." The turret fired a short burst of bullets, shattering one of the windows. A cold wind blasted through the room. She continued manipulating the controls. "As for the second question, where is your worthless, non-functioning device? See the previous answer." In unison, all the turrets went limp, emitting a low mechanical groan as they sank to the floor. The woman smiled. "And now her turrets don't work either." Higson said, "I'm very close to a breakthrough." The woman walked to the nearest wall of windows. "I'm sure you are. Every scientist who's ever worked on mind control has been, all the way back to Mesmer. It's like a tradition." She stuck her head out the broken window, into the cold night sky, and muttered, 56 floors down, so 3 up to the roof. Higson asked, "Why did you shoot out the window?" "Because the elevators and stairwells are all guarded and fortified. You're not going to want to be awake for this." She pointed her index finger at Higson. There was a soft, sharp hiss, and he fell unconscious.
When the secret agency known as the Toolbox recruits Beard, being a clandestine operative seems like a great way to get paid to do what she already does anyway. That is until a mission goes wrong and Baird is infected with a deadly virus. With only 7 days to live, Baird has to complete a series of daring missions, each one designed to bring her closer to a cure. Allegedly. Beard suspects that the Toolbox might not be telling her the whole truth. She's not sure what to believe or whom to trust. The clock is ticking, and you can have this book today. Here's what Audible has set up for us. They are offering a free audiobook and 30 days to give you the opportunity to check out their service. This includes free access to the Audible Plus catalog, which is updated monthly with new titles. To download your free audiobook, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories, and you can get your free book today. Thank you, Audible. And now it's time for your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
Well, we're back for another round of short ghost stories from you guys. This first one comes from Janine Garza, who didn't say where she was from. She has titled it, Why Don't People Believe? Hello, Ron. I watch a lot of those ghost videos on YouTube. I'm surprised by the number of people who say that no one believes them. When I was 10, I woke up and I saw a lady watching me. I was on the top bunk. I could only see her shoulders up. She had long blonde hair, was wearing a blueprint dress, and had a neutral expression. She looked like she was painted on cellophane. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. She disappeared, and I jumped out of my bed and ran really fast downstairs. My parents got out photo albums and asked if I saw her in any of the pictures. I didn't. They said, "Don't be afraid. Seeing people who have died is a gift." I said, I didn't want it. They heard of a lady who had the gift. They arranged a meeting which sounded like a good idea. OMG, she scared the crap out of me. Eventually, as I grew up, I found a medium who was very helpful, and I'm not afraid of what I see anymore. The reason I'm sharing my experience is that my parents didn't call me a liar. Instead, they had me meet with someone to help me understand what was going on. I am forever grateful to them. Janine Garza from Parts Unknown. That's a very good point, Janine. It really doesn't matter if you believe or not. What matters is that you respect the sightings and help those who just need to share what they saw. This next story comes from Brad Hubbard, who lives in Texas. He has titled his story, Don't Touch My Batman Bank. When I was 6 or 7 years old, I woke up one night. I'm not sure of the time, I just know that Leno was on. I saw what I thought was my brother standing on our dresser, reaching for my Batman 1989 piggy bank that came with some cereal. I was proud of it because it had $12 in it that I'd been saving to buy a Ninja Turtle. I don't know what made me think that it was my brother. We both have dark brown hair, almost black. But whoever was on the dresser was blonde and was wearing pajamas that neither of us owned, and was, well, glowing. Yes, he was lit up in the dark room, but somehow wasn't casting any light. Anyway, I see this thing reaching for my bank, and I think it's my brother trying to steal my money. I say, "Joe, go to sleep." Then I wait a couple seconds and say it again. On the third time, it turns and looks at me, still standing on the dresser. I got louder. "Joe, go to sleep." Then I'd had it and swore at him. I removed my blanket and turned on the lamp. As soon as I did, it disappeared. I felt the blood leave my face. I let out a death scream, ran downstairs to find my dad and brother watching TV, Leno, and I cried myself to sleep in my dad's arm, screaming about the ghost. Brad Hubbard, Texas. That is a creepy story for a 6-year-old. It sounds like to me that you handled it just right. I looked up your Batman piggy bank on eBay just to see what it looked like. I found it, and you can buy one for about $8. Thank you for your story. Our last short story comes from Kim Jensen, who lives in Boise, Idaho. Her story is titled, My Rose Recorder. So I had this weird experience once. I had a broken Rose audio recorder, and one day it began to work. So I was in my room playing with it. No one else was in the room but me. I heard 2 people speaking, a girl and a guy. I would record my voice, and one of them would reply. This went on for a while. I was so very confused. Then my mom called me into the living room for something, and once I returned, the recorder stopped working again. It never worked again. Ron, have you ever heard of an experience like this? Kim Jensen, Boise, Idaho. Actually, I have. As it turns out, haunted recorders are a thing, and you can even buy them on eBay. It appears they have the ability to hear the spirit world and even play it back. The idea is that its owner died and it inhabits the device. Other than that, I don't have a single idea of what you experienced. Well, that's it for this time. If you have a story that you would like to share, like Kim did, head to the main website at ronsamazingstories.com and click on the story submission banner. Leave your story, give it a title, and tell me where you're from. I'll read it if I can.
Not so important times in history.
In this segment, we take a look at historical events that may otherwise go unnoticed. We look at history with a fish-eyed lens, giving a perspective that should provide no insight to anyone or any time. But it is historical, or hysterical, as the case may be. Join us now for this event in history. Well, as you know, these past 2 weeks we've been watching the 2020 Olympics from Japan, something that I've really been enjoying. But let me tell you a story from another not-so-amazing Olympics. America's first Olympics may have been its worst, or at least its most bizarre. Held in 1904 in St. Louis, the Games were tied to that year's World Fair, which celebrated the centennial of the Louisiana Purchase. The Olympics' single event, the marathon, was conceived to honor the classical heritage of Greece and underscore the connection between the ancient and the modern. But from the start, the 1904 marathon was less a showstopper than a sideshow, a freakish spectacle that seemed more in keeping with the carnival atmosphere of the fair than the mood of the Games. The outcome was so scandalous that the event was nearly abolished for good. A few of the runners were recognized marathoners who had either won or placed in the Boston Marathon or had placed in previous Olympic marathons. But the majority of the field was composed of middle-distance runners and assorted oddities. Americans Sam Miller, Al Newton, John London, Michael Spring, and Thomas Hicks were all experienced marathoners and were among the favorites. Another American, Fred Lors, did all his training at night because he had a day job as a bricklayer and earned his spot in the Olympics by placing in a special 5-mile race sponsored by the Amateur Athletic Union. Among the leading oddities were 10 Greeks who had never run a marathon, 2 men from the Tswana tribe of South Africa who were in St. Louis as part of a South African World Fair exhibit, and who arrived at the starting line barefoot. Also, there was a Cuban national and former mailman named Felix Carbajal, who raised money to come to the States by demonstrating his running prowess throughout Cuba, once trekking the entire length of the island. Upon his arrival in New Orleans, he lost all his money in a dice game and had to walk and hitchhike to St. Louis. At 5 feet tall, he presented a slight but striking figure at the starting line, attired in a white, long-sleeved shirt, long, dark pants, a beret, and a pair of street shoes. One fellow Olympian took pity on the man, found a pair of scissors, and cut Carbajal's trousers at the knee. On August 30th, at precisely 3:03 p.m., David R. Francis, president of the Louisiana Purchase Exposition Company, fired the starting pistol, and the men were off. Heat and humidity soared into the 90s and the 24.85-mile course, which officials called the most difficult a human being was ever asked to run over. It wound across roads inches deep in dust. There were 7 hills, varying from 100 to 300 feet high, with some brutally long ascents. In many places, cracked stone was strewn across the roadway, creating perilous footing, and the men had to constantly dodge crosstown traffic, delivery wagons, railroad trains, trolley cars, and people walking their dogs. There were 2 places where athletes could secure fresh water. One from a tower at 6 miles and at a roadside well at 12 miles. James Sullivan, the chief organizer of the games, wanted to minimize the fluid intake to test limits and the effects of purposeful dehydration, a common area of research at the time. Cars carrying coaches and physicians motored alongside the runners, kicking up dust and launching coughing spells. Fred Loritz led the 32 starters from the gun, but by the first mile, Thomas Hicks edged ahead. William Garcia of California nearly became the first fatality of an Olympic marathon when he collapsed on the side of the road and was hospitalized with hemorrhaging. Dust had coated his esophagus and ripped his stomach lining. Had he gone unaided an hour longer, he would have bled to death. John Lorden suffered a bout of vomiting and gave up. Len Tao, one of the South African participants, was chased a mile off course by wild dogs. However, Felix Carnival trotted along in his cumbersome shoes and billowing shirt, making good time even though he paused to chat with spectators in broken English. On one occasion, he stopped at a car, saw the occupants were eating peaches, and asked for one. Being refused, he playfully snatched 2 and ate them as he ran. A bit further along in the course, he stopped at an orchard and snacked on some apples, which turned out to be rotten. Suffering from stomach cramps, he lay down and took a nap. Sam Miller, now in the lead, was also experiencing severe cramping. He slowed to a walk and eventually stopped. At the 9-mile mark, cramps also plagued Loritz. He decided to hitch a ride on one of the accompanying vehicles, waving at spectators and fellow runners as he passed. Hicks, one of the early favorites, came under care of a 2-man support crew at the 10-mile mark. He begged them for a drink, but they refused, instead sopping out his mouth with warm distilled water. 7 miles from the finish, his handlers handed him a concoction of strychnine and egg whites, the first recorded instance of drug use in the modern Olympics. Strychnine in small doses was commonly used as a stimulant, and at the time there were no rules about performance-enhancing drugs. Hicks' team also carried a flask of French brandy, but decided to withhold it until they could gauge the runner's condition. Meanwhile, Lawrence recovered from his cramps and emerged from his 11-mile ride in the automobile. One of Hicks' handlers saw him and ordered him off the course, but Lawrence kept running and finished with a time of just under 3 hours. The crowd roared and began chanting, "An American won!" Alice Roosevelt, the 20-year-old daughter of President Theodore Roosevelt, placed a wreath on Loritz's head and was just about to lower the gold medal around his neck when a witness reported. Someone called an indignant halt to the proceedings with the charge that Loritz was an imposter. Cheers turned to boos. Lawrence smiled and claimed that he never intended to accept the honor. He finished only for the sake of a joke. Hicks, the strychnine coursing through his blood, had grown ashen and limp. When he heard that Loritz had been disqualified, he perked up and forced his legs into a trot. His trainers gave him another dose of strychnine and egg whites, this time with some brandy to wash it down. They fetched warm water and soaked his body and head. After the bathing, he appeared to revive and quickened his pace. Over the last 2 miles of the road, race official Charles Lucas wrote, Hicks was running mechanically like a well-oiled piece of machinery. His eyes were dull, lustrous, and the ashen color of his face and skin had deepened. His arms appeared as weights well tied down, and he could scarcely lift his legs, and his knees were almost stiff. He began hallucinating, believing that the finish line was still 20 miles away. In the last mile, he begged for something to eat, then begged to lie down. He was given more brandy, but he refused tea. He swallowed 2 more egg whites. He walked up the first of the last 2 hills and then jogged down on the incline. Swinging into the stadium, he tried to run but was reduced to a graceless shuffle. His trainer carried him over the line, holding him aloft while his feet moved back and forth. He was declared the winner. It took 4 doctors and 1 hour for Hicks to feel well enough just to leave the grounds. He had lost 8 pounds during the course of the race and declared, "Never in my life have I ever run through such a tough course. Those terrific hills simply tear a man to pieces." Hicks and Loritz would meet again at the Boston Marathon the following year, which Loritz won without the aid of anything but his legs. So, there you have it, the 1904 Olympics.
Johnny, is this true?
As you know by now, I like to surf the internet to find the strange and unusual. I do this in the name of the podcast, but the truth is, I would do it anyway, even if there was no podcast. What you're about to hear is...
Johnny, is this true?
I will tell you a story and then ask the question, did I make it up or is it true? Your job is to decide. Let's get started.
Johnny, is this true?
This time we have more stories from the strange to the unusual. I love finding these little gems and love presenting them to you even more. This time, all of the stories came from a Facebook chat I had a few weeks ago. Or did they? Story 1. This story came from listener Valerie Perrault via Facebook. Or did it? My parents were newlyweds in New Jersey and then moved to Illinois after I was born. They lived there my entire childhood and then divorced the year I graduated. My dad moved to Las Vegas, my mom to Texas. When I turned 30, I took a job in South Florida, the first and only member of my family to ever travel there. While at a local Goodwill store in search of home furnishings, I found an old book of poetry on a kitchenware shelf. I liked the look of the cover, so I bought it for $0.25 and took it home with the rest of my stuff. Later that night, I opened the front cover and I was shocked to see an inscription in my dad's unmistakable handwriting. It was a gift to my mom on their 3rd wedding anniversary. Now, is this too crazy to be true, or did this really happen? This one is true. Valerie confirmed that the book was a family heirloom. She said, "My mom had sold it at a yard sale 10 or so years earlier. Both my parents have confirmed that this book is the real deal." How about that? Story 2. This story was sent in to the Facebook chat by Cherry Cuptus Crib. It is definitely one that makes you say, But is it true? My father had a heart attack many years ago, and I showed up at the hospital at 3 a.m. Given the time and the fact that he was in the ICU, I initially wasn't allowed in. However, I was finally let in by a nurse who calmed me down and allowed me to see my father. He also was so very kind to our family throughout my dad's hospital stay. About 6 months later, my paternal grandmother was in the ICU for a medical issue, and again, we were cared for by this same nurse. About a year later, I received a call from my dad telling me to turn on CNN. It turns out that our nurse was none other than Charles Cullen, who famously confessed to murdering 40 patients. Now, is this one true? So very creepy and so very true. Charles Edmund Cullen was a serial killer who confessed to murdering up to 40 patients during the course of his 16-year career as a nurse in a New Jersey hospital. New evidence suggests that Cullen may ultimately be responsible for more than 400 deaths, which would make him the most prolific serial killer in recorded history. That's just crazy. Story 3. Here is another story from that Facebook chat that was provided by Vicky Watt. Surely I made this one up. When I was first married back in the 1970s, one of the cups from my best dinner set got broken and I couldn't find an exact replacement. I could get the same color, but in a different shape. 40 years later, after moving 2,800 miles across the country, I went for a meal at my friend's house. I noticed that she had a dinner set like my replacement cup. After I told her the story about breaking a cup and only being able to get one like hers, she went to her cupboard and brought back a cup just like the one I had broken. She had had the same experience, but couldn't get one like mine. So 40 years later, we swapped cups, and we both have full sets again. Well, that's a very nice story and quite kismet, but is it true? It is, and there are pictures to prove it, which only goes to show you that you should never count your cups until they're broken. Yes, I'm aware that was pretty lame. Story 4. This last one also comes from the Facebook chat. It was generated by Katie Stokes. This one has a ring of truth to it, but so does enjoying a rogue fly in your house. I was sitting in my living room when a fly came in and landed on the coffee table. It was a big one, and I hate those things, so I made a swipe at it, and to my amazement, I hit it. A real Zen moment for me. I picked up the dead carcass and dumped it into the trash can. A few minutes later, another fly landed in the exact same spot and with the exact same result. When a third fly landed, I knew that I had a problem, and after being able to dispatch it again, I put it in the trash with the other corpses. However, when I looked into the trash can, there were no flies. Had I killed the same fly 3 times? This time I took the fly outside and tossed it away. Before the beast had hit the ground, it spun up its wings and flew away. Now, is this one an actual fly in the ointment, or just a pot of fly dew? Okay, this one is total fly dew. I made it up, and I bet I fooled more than just a few of you. Am I right? Well, that's it for Johnny Is It True? All of these stories, except the last one, of course, came from a Facebook chat I was involved in. I am thinking I'm going to do this again sometime, and I hope to have more of you on the chat line so that we can swap some stories. This Johnny Is It True was brought to you by Gladys Goodies, great treats for your pets to eat. Do you have any stories that are strange and unusual that you would like to share? I'd love to have them. So send them on to Ron's Amazing Stories, and I'll use them if I can. And now this from Gladys Goodies.
I'm Gladdy, the dachshund, the face of Gladdy's Goodies. Are you worried about your pet's health? My parents were too, especially since I developed pancreatitis. They couldn't find any treats I could eat, so they made some. Our natural treats are healthy for all dogs, with and without health issues. We have lots of delicious flavors like chicken, turkey, salmon, sweet potato, beef, and more. With our homemade treats, you won't worry about the contents because they have no chemicals, fillers, or bad ingredients. Go to GladysGoodies.com now to get your fur friend a bag and pick them up some swag while you're there. You'll be glad you did. Remember, we have the treats and swag to make their tails wag. Again, that's GladysGoodies.com. Again, that's GladysGoodies.com.
Our featured story is written by Jack Douglas. More about him later. It is a what-if tale that looks at space exploration and the pitfalls that they could potentially unleash. It comes from the Amazing Stories magazine, April of 1955. It is titled Test Rocket and received high honors from the writers of the time. I hope you enjoy it. It's amazing how much you can learn about absolute strangers if you just stop to think about the kind of animal they'll put into a test rocket. Captain Beard stood at the window of the laboratory where the 1,000 parts of a strange rocket lay strewn in careful order. Small groups worked slowly over the dismantled parts. The captain wanted to ask, but something stopped him. Behind him, Dr. Johansson sat at his desk, his gnarled old hand tight about a whiskey bottle. The bottle the doctor had always kept, but never brought out except when he was alone. He waited for Captain Beard to ask his question. Captain Beard turned at last. "There are markings?" he asked. It was not a question. Captain Beard knew the markings of the rocket testing station as well as the doctor did. "Yes," the doctor said. "There are markings, identical, but not our paint." Captain Beard turned back to the window. 6 months ago it happened. 10 minutes after launching, the giant test rocket had only been a speck on the observation screen. Captain Beard had turned away in disgust. "A mouse," the captain had said. "Unfortunate. A mouse can't observe, build, report. My men are getting restless, Johansson." "When we're ready, Captain," the doctor had said. It was 12 hours before the urgent call from Central Control brought the captain running back to the laboratory. The doctor was there before him. Professor Schultz wasted no time. He pointed to the instrument panel. "Sudden shift, see for yourself. We'll miss Mars by 1.25 million, at least." 2 hours later, the shift in course of the test rocket was apparent to all of them, and so was their disappointment. "According to the instruments, the steering shifted 1/4 of an inch. No reason shows up," Professor Schultz said. "Flaw in the metal?" Dr. Johansson said. "How far will it go?" Captain Beard asked. Professor Schultz shrugged. "Until the fuel runs out, which is probably as good as never, or the landing mechanism is activated by a planet-sized body." "Course, did you plot it?" the doctor asked. "Of course I did," Professor Schultz said. "As close as I can calculate it, it's headed for Alpha Centauri." Captain Beard turned away. The doctor watched him. "Perhaps, Captain, you'll not be so hasty with your men's lives in the future," the doctor said. Professor Schultz sat, spinning dials. "No contact," the professor said. "No contact at all." That had been 6 months ago. 3 more test rockets had been fired successfully before the urgent report came through from Alaskan Observation Post number 4. A rocket was coming across the pole. The strange rocket was tracked and escorted by fighter jets all the way to the rocket testing station, where it cut its own motors and gently landed in the center of a division of atomic-armed infantry. The captain, the doctor, and everyone else waited impatiently. "You sure it's not ours?" Captain Beard asked. The doctor laughed. "Ha! Identical, yes, but 3 times the size of ours. Perhaps one of the Asian ones." "No, it's our design, but too large. Much too large." Professor Schultz put their thoughts into words. "Looks like someone copied ours. Someone, somewhere. It's hard to imagine, but true, nevertheless." They waited 2 weeks. Nothing happened. Then a radiation shield team went in to examine the rocket. 2 more weeks, and the strange rocket was dismantled and spread over the field of the testing station. The rocket was dismantled, and the station had begun to talk to itself in whispers, and looked at the sky. Captain Beard now stood at the window and looked out at the dismantled rocket. He looked, but his mind was not on the parts of the rocket he could see from the window. "The materials, they're not ours?" the captain asked. "Unknown here," the doctor said. The captain nodded. "Those were our instruments." "Yes." The doctor still held the whiskey bottle in a tight grasp. "They sent them back?" the captain asked. The doctor crashed the bottle hard against the desktop. "Ask it, Captain. For God's sake, ask it." The captain turned to face the doctor directly. "It was a man. A full-grown man?" The doctor sighed, as if letting the pent-up steam of his heart escape. "Yes, it's a man. It breathes. It eats. It has all the attributes of a man, but it's not of our planet." "It's speech," the captain began. "That isn't speech, Captain. It's only sound." The doctor stopped. He examined the label of his bottle of whiskey very carefully. A good brand of whiskey. "He seems quite happy in the storeroom, you know, Captain, which puzzled me at first. He can't read anything, not even the instruments in that ship. In fact, he shows no interest in this rocket at all." The captain sat down now. He sat at the desk and faced the doctor. "At least they had the courage to send a man, Doctor, not a mouse. A man." The doctor stared at the captain, his hands squeezing and unsqueezing the bottle again. "A man who can't read his own instruments," the doctor laughed. "Perhaps you've failed to see the point. Like that stupid general who sits out there waiting for men from somewhere. Don't you think it's a possibility?" The doctor nodded. "A very good possibility, Captain, but they'll not be men." The doctor seemed to pause and lean forward. "That rocket, Captain, is a test rocket. A test rocket just like ours." Then the doctor picked up his whiskey and at last poured 2 glasses. "Perhaps a drink, Captain?" The captain took the whiskey, but was watching the sky outside the window. Well, that was fun for me to read, and I hope it was tolerable for you to hear. I love the subtleness of it. It doesn't come right out and say that the alien form of a mouse is humankind. But that's a pretty plausible idea when you think about it. We may not be the top of the food chain after all. Perhaps we're more akin to really smart lab rats. Our story was written by Jack Douglas. He was a comedy writer who wrote for both radio and television. He wrote for such greats as Red Skelton, Bob Hope, Jimmy Durante, Bing Crosby, Woody Allen, and believe it or not, laugh in. He also appeared on television with Merv Griffith and Jack Barr. By 1959, his celebrity status enabled him to mass-market a book called My Brother Was an Only Child, which became a national bestseller. He won an Emmy in 1954 for Best Written Comedy Material.
As read by. Amazing stories read by amazing people.
This time on As Read By, we have a short story that was suggested by Olive Howard, who lives in Hillsboro, Oregon. I worked with her husband for several years, and he recently has passed away. She wanted me to play this story on the show. It comes from the novel Tales of War by Lord Dunsany. More about him later. My friend Bob loved this book, and this story is the perfect tribute to him. Thank you, Olive, for sharing it. It is titled The Last Scene of All and is read for us by Dale Groffman.
After John Caleron was hit, he carried on in kind of twilight of the mind. Things grew dimmer and calmer. Harsh outlines of events became blurred. Memories came to him. There was singing in his ears like far-off bells. Things seemed more beautiful than they had a while ago. To him, it was for all the world like an evening after some quiet sunset, when lawns and shrubs and woods and some old spire looked lovely in the late light, and one reflects on past days. Thus he carried on, seeing things dimly. And what was sometimes called the roar of battle, those aerial voices that snarl and moan and whine and rage at soldiers, had grown dimmer too. It all seemed further away, and littler, as far things are. He still heard the bullets. There was something so violently and intensely sharp in the snap of passing bullets at short range that you hear them in deepest thought, and even in dreams. He heard them tearing by, above all things else. The rest seemed fainter and dimmer and smaller and further away. He did not think he was very badly hit, but nothing seemed to matter as it did a while ago. Yet he carried on. And then he opened his eyes very wide and found he was back in London again, in the underground train. He knew it at once by the look of it. He had made hundreds of journeys long ago by those trains. He knew by the dark outside that it had not yet left London, but what was odder than that, if one stopped to think of it, was that he knew exactly where it was going. It was the train that went away out into the country where he used to live as a boy. He was sure of that without thinking. When he began to think how he came to be there, he remembered the war as a very far-off thing. He supposed he had been unconscious a very long time. He was all right now. Other people were sitting beside him on the same seat. They all seemed like people he remembered a very long time ago. In the darkness opposite, beyond the windows of the train, he could see their reflections clearly. He looked at the reflections, but could not quite remember. A woman was sitting on his left. She was quite young. She was like someone that he most deeply remembered than all the others were. He gazed at her and tried to clear his mind. He did not turn and stare at her, but he quietly watched her reflection before him in the dark. Every detail of her dress, her young face, her hat, the little ornaments she wore, were minutely clear before him, looking out of the dark. So contented she looked that you would say she was untouched by war. As he gazed at the clear, calm face, and the dress that seemed neat though old, and, like all things so far away, his mind grew clearer and clearer. It seemed to him certain that it was the face of his mother, but from 30 years ago, out of old memories and one picture. He felt sure it was his mother as she had been when he was very small. And yet, after 30 years, how could he know? He puzzled and tried to be quite sure. But how she came to be there, looking like that, out of those oldest memories, he did not even think of at all. He seemed to be hugely tired by many things, and did not want to think. Yet he was very happy, more happy even than tired men just come home all new to comfort. He gazed and gazed at the face in the dark, and then he felt quite sure. He was about to speak. Was she looking at him? Was she watching him, he wondered? He glanced up for the first time to his own reflection in the clear row of faces. His own reflection was not there, and blank dark showed between his two neighbors. And then he knew he was dead.
Quite a moving story and a tribute to my friend Bob, who was a Vietnam veteran and a good man. The story comes from the pen of Lord Dunsany. His full name was Edward John Morton Drax Plunkett, 18th Baron of Dunsany. He was born in July 1878 and died October 25, 1957. He was a writer and a dramatist, and published mostly as Lord Dunsany. Over 90 of his books, mainly fantasy, appeared in his lifetime, and believe it or not, people are still finding unpublished manuscripts that he has written. The latest of which was published in 2004, which just happens to contain our story from today. To my friend, Sergeant Robert Howard, thank you for your service, and may you rest in peace.
Maybe you're sort of tired of eating the same old thing day after day. Maybe you'd like to try something different, something delicious, something with a marvelous flavor that just knocks the spots off any other cereal you've ever tried. Now, if that's the case, why don't you ask your mother to let you have a big bowl of crackly, crunchy, golden brown Wheaties flakes tomorrow morning? Ask your mother to let you have a cereal you'll really like the taste of. Ask her for the big, husky cereal for wide-awake fellows and girls who not only start things, but who see them through. You'll say it's swell.
Try Wheaties, they're whole wheat with all of the brands. Won't you try Wheaties? For wheat is the best food of man. They're crispy, they're crunchy the whole year through. Jack Hampton never tires them, and neither will you. So just buy Wheaties, the best breakfast food in the land.
That was episode number 502, and Janine Garza, Brad Hubbard, Kim Jensen, Olive Howard, Valerie Perrault, Chari Cupstas Cribb, Vicky Watt, and Katie Stokes made it happen. Thank you, guys. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find any of the links I mentioned and how to contact us. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. Clicking that follow or like button makes us grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.